So what does the workforce look like in 2025? How many bots will we have in our teams? How many AI personas will we have in our teams? And how many humans?
Welcome back to Futurists World, your home for big ideas about the future. I'm Mike Hill, and today we have a fascinating episode on the future of humanity. We're going to be asking the really big questions of two very special guests, including Katherine Boiciuc. KB, welcome back. It's great to have you here. KB is the Associate Director at Maximus International, an innovative business consultancy. She's a global leader and extensive experience in technology and telco. She's a keynote speaker and passionate about diversity and an activator at SheEO, a global community of radically generous women working on the world's to-do list. And we are joined by the volcano man himself, Zoltan Istvan, a presidential candidate for the Transhumanist Party, former journalist at Nat Geo, based in California. He's gained worldwide attention for pioneering and popularizing the extreme sport of volcano boarding. So, Zoltan, I'm going to ask you more about that soon. And you are the founder of the Transhumanist Party. Thank you for joining me today. And I just want to launch right in there, guys, and ask you the big question about the future of democracy. Democracy has been under siege this year, and I want to know how are you guys feeling now about the future of democracy? KB, over to you.
I think it's exciting times. I think that what we've seen is almost a reckoning of power. And when there's a reckoning that happens with power, what happens in society is that everything becomes more democratized. And so you're seeing the democratization of leadership, the democratization of power, the democratization of wealth. And we're starting to see foundational shifts in how we as a society treat each other, how we generate wealth, the things that we are holding leadership in particular accountable to, and what we will and won't accept as standards anymore, or as the status quo anymore. So I think it's exciting times. I think we're only going to see further instability and further disruption of entrenched ways of thinking, believing and working. And I think that only humanity can better from it. I think that the more we see the breaking down of siloed thinking and generational poverty and cultural misalignment around values and how we treat each other, I think humanity can only become richer because of it.
So you're feeling optimistic, Zoltan. You're calling in from California, and you've run as a presidential candidate in the States. How are you feeling about the future of democracy right now?
Well, I think democracy has been greatly challenged in the United States recently. I think, even though I ran in 2020 as well as a presidential candidate for the Republican Party, I voted for Joe Biden, mainly because Trump was threatening to do the dictatorship thing. And that undermines the democratic process entirely. And then same thing with how he's trying to evade, saying Biden was winner. But all those things aside, I have to say that I'm not that optimistic about where the future is going in terms of democracy, only because inequality is continuing to grow wider and wider every year. You would have thought coronavirus would have kind of brought a lot of people together, but in America, at least, it's the rich have gotten richer and the poor have gotten poor by a lot, by more than really had happened in any time in the last 20 years. And so when that tends to happen, inequality, yes, there's disruption, but it doesn't always translate into a better democratic future. Sometimes it just translates into more populism or just more disruption in society. And people like myself we get really bothered and we just don't want to even vote. We don't want to be, say we're an American anymore. And in fact, I've been trying to do business things in Europe at the moment because frankly, after Trump, I was sort of sick of being an American.
You're over it. KB, is equality something that we should be going after? It's a bit of a utopian goal. Is it really the be-all and end-all?
I think that the moment that we realise that equality is just the minimum basic standard, as opposed to the thing that we should be all striving for, imagine what else we could be doing with that energy as a species. So for me, I just kind of go, I think we've raised our expectations of the minimum standards. And I think that allows us to go after larger world problems together. I look at how the world's pulled together around trying to create and find a coronavirus vaccine. It's a great example of, bringing together over a common cause and achieving something markedly different. We've been trying to find cures for HIV, for the common cold, for cancer for decades, making incremental progress. And I think we've seen wide scale shift in how we collaborate across the world around pursuing vaccines. And I hope that model continues now that, the coronavirus is kind of almost off the to-do list in terms of vaccines, that same model can be applied. So I think equality for me is the basic minimum standard, and let's kind of pursue those other big things like interstellar space travel and how we solve water shortage and how we solve, world hunger, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Zoltan, how do you feel about world economics post-COVID? Do you think that our attitudes towards endless growth are going to be challenged now?
It's really interesting to think what we think about economics in the post-corona world. Honestly, I don't know what's going on with everybody. I kind of I see the market soaring. I see real estate soaring. The rich become richer without doing anything simply because there's been a massive amount of inflation. Will it all come crumbling down, or is modern monetary theory really something that's real where we can't control it just by printing money and helicopter money? Government actually has a better handle on what's going on. History has always shown that that's not the case. I'd like to believe that they can take us out of these giant, almost depression-like things and put us into very quickly a place of prosperity. But I'm really not convinced of that. I think we come to a place in the future where there's going to have to be a reckoning on how much money people can print without actually working. And then we have this giant automation factor. And we also have China involved that doesn't seem to have been nearly as affected by the coronavirus as the West. So what happens with the balance of powers in the future? It's really anyone's guess. But I am extremely concerned about where markets are right now. And I worry that everything has overinflated itself and could easily come crashing down in the next 12 months.
KB, I'm pretty confused about the situation here in Australia because our governing party was all about bringing deficit down, and then they've just been printing money and spending like there's no tomorrow since COVID. What's going on? Have we been duped, about how our economies actually function?
I think that there's two schools of thought. One is the foundations of traditional economy have absolutely shifted. And for the people that haven't worked out that, putting your money in stocks and bonds and in real estate is the way to kind of protect your nest egg or grow wealth. If you're not looking at how you, invest in venture capital, how you use cryptocurrency or Bitcoin as to offset some of the risks around, to Zoltan's point, the disruption. There's a big bubble that's going to burst in traditional mainstays of money. I think we're seeing that particularly with the emergence of buy now, pay later organisations. As an example, you're starting to see generationally, or cultures move away from credit cards, but they're leaning completely into buy now, pay later agreements. So that's a fundamental shift in the way traditional banking has worked. Traditional revenue incomes or revenue streams have worked for the big banks, particularly here in Australia, and you're starting to see Zip, Afterpay, etc., just explode in terms of creating a pocket of wealth that wasn't there previously in the market. I do think, though, more broadly, we've seen a number of times now in Australia that the Australian economy responds well to stimulus. It responds well to nation-building activities, and I'm a Victorian, so we are enjoying having a Labor government that has, launched off a big raft of investments that start to build and shift the trajectory of wealth in the economy. So you're seeing things like free childcare, free preschool education, investments in female-founded startups, large infrastructure builds, so that you're starting to see what I think a lot of market was activity which was about a bro recovery. So your traditional male-dominated sectors were getting a lot of stimulus, and you were starting to see that it was kind of a she session, that, where was the money for the educators? Where was the money for the childcare workers? Where was the money for the teachers, et cetera, et cetera? And now I think you're seeing really balanced stimulus. So I think that it actually comes down to the governing party of each nation and to see the balance of stimulus, because I think it can't be all or nothing, because otherwise we just continue to remain and keep sectors of our community entrenched in poverty. And I think you're starting to see nations take a much more balanced approach to how they're stimulating their economies post-COVID.
Zoltan, let's compare and contrast the situation in the States right now. How do you feel about this idea of very substantial government stimulus to prop up the economy?
Well, I mean, I don't like government money. I've been a kind of a libertarian-minded person forever. But honestly, if you drive out to a shopping mall, you will see so many for lease signs. And what's happened is the amount of money they've given out has either gone to the rich or to the super poor. And what's happened is the middle class has sort of gotten the lack of it. They just haven't gotten much, which is why all these small businesses are going out. When you actually look at what the American economy is made of, it is made up of a lot of small businesses, besides the fact that this brings out a ton of diversity. So I think what needs to be done is we need to sort of save all our small businesses at this point, or we potentially lose the middle class and increase the inequality. Now, I don't want to say let's give out government money, but I think in these circumstances, that's the only answer. What I would caution, though, is that we need to make sure that any money that's given out is tied to kind of efforts that say, look, you got to do this with your money and do that with your money and really build your businesses back and make sure we keep the middle class. Instead, what's happened is we've kind of established where a huge portion of the American population, around 55, 56%, now receives government support that's permanent. And that was a big difference than before. And while I'm a supporter of a universal basic income, there's a big difference between universal basic income and welfare. I don't mind a kind of a big giant basic income where everybody gets something at it, and then that way they have more of a buffer zone for shelter and food like that. But what we're talking about right now is just expanding welfare, and that's just not helping out the country, and it's certainly not helping out the middle class. So again, the system has to be changed so that there are incentives for when you get money, you actually use that to make America a more prosperous place.
Yeah, and that goes to KB's point about using it on, major infrastructure, nation building activities, which is where a lot of the spend's gone down here. KB, I want to ask you about female leadership. We touched on it in our last episode. You talked to us about Greta and Jacinta Ardern, and I guess we can add Kamala to that list now. How are you feeling about the future of female leadership? It seems like it might be more important now than ever.
I think that we continue to make progress, but I'm still impatient about the level of progress. So I think we still have a long way to go, particularly in Australia. So I still, I look at my television screen and I look at our government and I just say that government doesn't reflect the cultural diversity, the neurodiversity, the able diversity, the BIPOC community in this country. So I do think there's a long way to go in terms of political leadership. In terms of enterprise leadership in Australia, I think that we are seeing the emergence of all forms of diversity. We are seeing, I think for the first time, I think more women have rung the ASX bell this year than in the history of the ASX. And who would have thought that about 2020? So there's some bright spots amongst the impatientness in the data around how do we get from that 25 to 28 to 35% mark, which is kind of the current reporting on executives in C-suite or women on boards in Australia. How do we just break through and not see that 50% is the kind of end game and just kind of get there quickly and get on to the rest of it? Because I wish we weren't talking about women in leadership. I wish we were talking about diversity of leadership across the board. I think gender is just such a lot. Again, I feel like it's just a minimum standard. And if we can get beyond gender diversity, we can actually get to the real richness of diversity that we're missing, which is diversity of thought, neurodiversity, cultural diversity, experiential diversity. And then I think the pipeline, I've never seen it more exciting. I joined SheEO this year and became an activator to join the other hundreds of thousands of women around the world that are funding each other's dreams. So, there is different ways to create equity and build businesses. I think about Sheba, a great example, Zoltan, you won't have heard of Sheba, but it's Uber, but women for women version. So it's a women rideshare that can hail female drivers so that there's a secure situation, and they also do childcare. I look at Sheba and the founder, Georgina, and she went traditional equity. She went to the banks. She went to venture capitalists. And they went, no, we don't back you. She went to the market. She went to the nation and raised $3 million with people like myself and many women and men across the country, chipping in $1,000, $5,000, $10,000. And now she has, a expanding nation rideshare proposition that is completely differentiated in market. So I also think there is now different ways to create wealth, and you don't have to fight the glass labyrinth that is inside corporate if you don't want to anymore. You can actually just create your own business, back yourself, and take it to a different way to get built into the market and create your impact in the world. So that's exciting to me. It's exciting to me that we're seeing so many women ring the ASX bell in Australia.
Right on. Zoltan, what's going on with diversity and leadership over there? We had two very old dudes battling it out for the presidency in the end. You didn't make it into that final race, unfortunately. But, how do you feel about diversity at the moment in US leadership?
Well, I think obviously diversity is a great thing. And, I'm married to a very strong woman, I would consider. She's an OBGYN. She works at Planned Parenthood. I have two daughters. So I'm all about, trying to make at least the women in my life as strong as possible. But I think, we have come to a point in America, especially California, where this pendulum can swing too many directions. And I agree very much that women and minorities need to find different ways to break through the glass ceilings that exist. And some of those ways can be technological. I mean, I wrote an article for Quartz last year, one of my favorite ones, on IGF, which is this new method of using stem cells from your cheek to be able to essentially get pregnant, meaning that a 75-year-old woman has just as good of a chance of getting pregnant as a 25-year-old does, because you can take the stem cells and turn them into ovary eggs for the woman. And it changes this idea. Like, this is how a transhumanist would think. We think, how can we improve the world through technology? And one way, of course, by improving women's chances of working longer is by, of course, eliminating this maternity leave thing where, that's been one of the main excuses that men have had for not maybe promoting them to management positions. Well, now we have science as saying, wait a sec, it's biology might stop the clock. So now women don't have to worry about their biological clocks. So as a transhumanist, I'm constantly looking for different methods like that can actually be installed on policy ways that might actually improve the chances of minorities as well as women in rising up and coming to a state of equality. I mean, look, if there's whatever the number of people are, and I've said this about plumbers, I've said this about nurses and teachers, if we have, let's say, right now the American government is run by like 41% attorneys. And attorneys only make up 6% of the population in America. What I want to see is teachers running for office. What I want to see is plumbers running for office. I want to see construction workers. I want diversity, not just in your looks or your genders, but also in your occupation, so that we have the true perspective of what society really is like. And that will require government policy to put in some of that stuff. And, I think leading politicians might be able to come up with some good ideas to help the world out that way. Okay,
it sounds like you're on the same page about wanting more diversity, but KB, I've got to get you to weigh in on this idea of having babies at 75. Or let's broaden it out to the role of technology in getting us out of this mess we're in.
I think becoming a parent is exhausting at any age, but I also think that that's part of our bias that we talk about. Even in a conversation about diversity in women, we talk about childbearing as it's a thing. So as opposed to becoming a parent and what that means, whether you're a male or a female in the workplace. So for me, I wish that becoming a parent wasn't part of the conversation, because then I think we'd truly get there in terms of our internal biases around our expectations on women and what society expects from women. In terms of technology and how I think that we're seeing, like in particular for me and the organisations I work with, how we're seeing them use technology to come out of this. Well, in Australia, I feel like we're really in re-entry. I think we've got, all states really in re-entry mode. And I know that it's different in other countries around the world, but I think that you're seeing an acceleration of a couple of themes. I think that you're seeing an acceleration in the adoption of technology that allows workforces to create autonomous ways of working. And I think that particularly in Australia, we didn't really have that similar discipline that I've seen, say, in Israel or in Silicon Valley, where teams, work around the sun, work in the time that suits them, but they don't work in such a live fashion. In Australia, everything's live. You go to the meeting between 9 and 10, and you have to be at the meeting, as opposed to join that meeting in an autonomous way, see a recording, add a comment to a thread. So seeing large organisations really invest in working on their ways of working and creating technology for their workforce to have autonomous ways of working, whether that be Teams, WhatsApp, Slack, etc. I think that we're also seeing a approach to hybrid teams that is really exciting me. I think that our top 100 clients, and we've worked with 10,000 leaders so far this year, I think hybrid teams is probably the most sought after topic. So how can I work with a team that's working in multiple locations, working in the office, working face-to-face with clients, and also want to, work flexibly from home 3 days a week and maybe pop into the office 1 or 2 days a week? And the conversation more broadly has become about workforce planning for the future. So what does the workforce look like in 2025? How many bots will we have in our teams? How many AI personas will we have in our teams? And how many human? So hybrid workforce in the true sense of the word, but hybrid workforce planning for the future. I probably saw that 5 or 6 years ago in Silicon Valley, being very, very prevalent, very, very clear around. I saw a product manager, sit down and brief his team, and he had his team there. He briefed what were the bots going to be working on for the week, what were the AI's queue management looking like, and then what was his team going to do in interacting. And I was like, oh my goodness, I wonder how many leaders are thinking about their leadership capability and how they're thinking about the future of work, and it's not going to be all human. It excites me to see that I feel like COVID has enacted that pursuit of a hybrid workforce, and particularly in the Australian market that we're working in. And I can't wait to see what happens. Honestly, I think we're just at the beginning of accessing the technology that allows us to create value in a very different way.
Well, Zoltan, you're a stone's throw from Silicon Valley there, and you're a transhumanist. Do you want to explain to the audience what that means and how you see the evolution of humanity over the next 10-year horizon?
Sure. Well, transhumanism is an international social movement of many millions of people around the world that want to use radical science and technology to upgrade the human being and also to upgrade the human experience. It can be anything from virtual reality to exoskeleton suits that help the disabled out to even brain implants. And I have an implant in my hand that locks my front door, so I don't need keys. It's all sorts of things like that. But it's ground zero is still Silicon Valley, and that's really where we have a ton of startups working on this stuff. And there are people like myself, and that want to and look forward to upgrading the human being. We look forward to having robotic parts inside us, including robotic arms that will throw a football, a kilometer instead of just a few hundred meters. So, that's where we're going. And I think the 10-year future involves, for sure, in my opinion, that people will be replacing limbs with robotic limbs because the robotic limbs will be better than their biological limbs. But it also probably will involve, at least maybe the 15-year future, the same thing with eyeballs. The idea that there are already blind people in California that are FDA approved that have robotic eyes that can see telescopically better than you and I can see, and they can navigate certain things. And of course, it's not very difficult to download that stuff, Facebook or even this kind of podcast, directly into that technology, right into your brain. They're already working on all these different things. There are dozens of companies working on them. There are Google, Facebook, Apple. They all have these, they like to keep it secret because a lot of this is scary for the general public, but I can assure you all of them have, probably $50, $100 million entities that are designed to try to see when will the iPhone actually be a part of your brain, or when will advertising be directly here, Google Maps in your head. So that's, I don't know if it's the 10-year future. I can almost guarantee, though, it's probably the 15-year future. But you'll start to see a lot of this stuff within 6 to 8 years, you're going to see the experimentation of it. Almost in the same way you look around now and you see driverless cars that are just doing all the testing. And of course, in some places in Arizona, driverless cars are now the real thing where they do taxing. But, just 2 years ago, we said, when will we see it? And now they are doing it. So we think the same thing with a lot of the brainwave technology and transhumanism. 6 to 9 years, and definitely within 15 years, you and I might have this podcast in our brains.
So KB, that really brings up a lot of questions about the workforce, as you were talking about, and where the lines are going to get very blurred, aren't they, between technology, people, and our lives and how they interact with work. So there's a lot to navigate there. I want to move on to the environment. It's one of the greatest challenges facing humanity today. KB, how are you feeling about our efforts to get on top of this existential problem?
Frustrated as an Australian that we are so behind on what I think are the bare minimum standards around commitments to things. But I do think that we are going to see that change quite quickly, particularly as Biden takes office in the US. I think that we'll start to see some positive momentum globally around the environment again. I think more broadly, again, there's some bright spots coming. So I look at AGL, an energy incumbent, has, done a great job of buying up the traditional coal mine sector, been an energy retailer, probably the largest energy retailer in Australia for a long time, Zoltan, has now, as recently started announcing in market its battery replacement project. So really large battery infrastructure builds. So it's nice to see an incumbent like AGL that is almost being the steward of old energy and is being the custodian for bringing it forward and turning on the future of clean energy. So that excites me. I think AGL's announcement around electric vehicles, and you can lease an electric vehicle on your electricity bill. So it's encouraging people to begin to consider shifting from their traditional vehicle purchase of choice with a low barrier entry into the electric vehicle market. I think that you're seeing governments as well. I think we're seeing, South Australia, a huge battery announcement, Victoria with the Geelong battery announcement. So I think we're starting to see some really lovely signals. But I also think that most of the agitation in the Australian market is coming from people like Mike and Brooks and Atlassian, and they're really holding the politicians accountable, their feet to the fire, that we can be a nation that is an innovation nation, and that can use the superpowers of the land that we have to not mine it for its resources, but actually leverage its clean energy potential and become a superpower in terms of an energy generating nation. So there is so much work to be done, but I have confidence that I think we're going to see the bright sparks that have emerged this year. I think we're going to see really big momentum over the next 5 years in Australia.
Zoltan, over to you. So you're in the States, one of the world's biggest polluters, but also at the bleeding edge of the green revolution. What's going to happen next, or are we going to need your volcano boarding skills to just survive?
Well, honestly, the transhumanists have a little bit of a different perspective, and it's a little bit strange, but we believe in technological fixes to the environmental crisis. We simply think that reducing the carbon footprint is not the way to change the planet. We've probably already destroyed the planet. And frankly, I started my career at National Geographic doing a lot of environmental articles. We had destroyed the planet 20 years ago. But what we can do, there are many things to do to save the planet. For example, I used to be a director at a major wildlife organization in Southeast Asia, and we would go around and bust poachers and try to stop poaching of illegal wildlife. But it turns out now, 15 years later, the very best way to replicate or replenish the Siamese crocodile in Cambodia isn't through stopping poaching. It's through doing a Jurassic Park method in a laboratory and releasing 5,000 of them in the wild and hoping that 10% survive. And that's how you replenish species. Now, that's a technological fix. It's a transhumanist fix. The same thing We think it with desertification and stuff like that, there are ways to mix sand in with different types of new compounds that they're working on to make a desert into something that can grow food. Or the same thing with controlling weather. And then there's a huge amount of universities, Harvard and whatnot, that are working on trying to bring rain clouds. And it sounds sort of like magic, but take a step 10, 15 years in the future with nanotechnology, and that's how we're going to control the planet and hopefully restore it to a pristine level, using these amazing new methods, as opposed to just, maybe lessening our carbon footprint. With China and India growing is probably impossible on a global scale anyways, but innovation can save the planet. So that's really the Silicon Valley transhumanist take on things.
Right on. You mentioned China there, KB. I want to get your take on China. Both America and Australia are sort of at a loggerheads with China at the moment. What's the way forward, do you see?
Yeah, I have been watching the news with interest. I think that whenever you have polar opposites, and that I think that what we're taking is really polar opposite positions with each other at the moment, at least publicly. In my heart of hearts, I am hoping that there is backroom conversations going on, and some middle ground brokers are having some very reasonable conversations, because I think that whenever you generate a win-lose situation, both parties lose. And that is what I'm seeing is happening right now in terms of posturing. And I think that I really feel for the industry. I really feel for the wine industry. I really, feel for the industries that are now getting tariffs dropped on them with no warning, and export bans dropped on them. I just think that there is a much more reasonable way to have a conversation about this. And if it was easy, we would have done it already. So I think that every now and then there's a shift in power, a shift in the foundations, just like, the rumblings before an earthquake. And I hope that sanity reigns, and that there'll be people brokering some middle ground. I think that the world is a small place, and our proximity to China means that we should be working together towards where we do agree, as opposed to where we disagree.
Yeah. Zoltan, if you were President-elect Istvan at the moment, how would you handle the China situation?
Well, it's very sad for me. I mean, one of the main premises I ran on was that we have to out-innovate China in the next few years in order to, at least America, to stay the predominant kind of leading democratic nation in the world that can kind of keep the peace a little bit. I think we've lost that. I think, especially after coronavirus, there's just no way that China is not going to emerge as the world leader in the next 4 to 5 years. And you can see them spreading their muscles. They're also controlling the transhumanist movement. I got to say that they don't have the religious background or maybe baggage that America has. Our vice president is very against genetic editing, against some of these scary transhumanist things. China seems to be all for it. They're moving forward with AI, with genetic editing, with a whole bunch of things. And they, the Buddhist Confucius culture goes with it much better than our Judeo-Christian culture does. And I can't imagine at this point that China doesn't take their power and try to become the next dominant force in the world. And I know that's not what everyone wants to hear, but we needed to make this change maybe 8 years ago, maybe 4 years ago. We need to out-innovate them. We needed to somehow control them. I don't think that happened. I mean, Trump tried. I think Biden is probably best to just try to become as peaceful and as much trade as possible, so that we sort of force democracy through the system. But even that might be too impossible at this point. We might have, I got to be honest, America seems like it's on a decline, and China seems like it's on a fast rise. And I don't know if it's salvageable at this point. They might just end up being in charge.
All right. Thanks to you both for talking the future of humanity today. We're almost at the end of our journey. Before we leave it off, KB, the future of humanity, how are you feeling? Optimistic or pessimistic, and why?
I think you know my answer to that question already. I'm a global optimist, and I believe that we all change the world one decision, one meeting, one conversation at a time. So I am a big believer in that. We just need to get on with the job at hand, and get on with enacting the change that we want to see in the world. So the future exists. It's just not evenly distributed. So reach out and pull it forward for yourself and your organisation.
Love your work. Zoltan, same question. Future of humanity, optimist or pessimist, and why?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not as optimistic as I was about a year ago. And I got to say, the biggest problem with coronavirus, it's great that the world did bond together. I feel we did kind of come together and overcome this. We have the virus, the vaccine coming out, and that's great. But in the meantime, we probably lost approximately 2 to 3 years of innovation. Science projects had to stop. Some got canceled. Universities, at least in America, Harvard, Columbia, places like that, had to cut budgets by 20, 30%. This is all going to have a huge effect on medicine, science, progress, technology moving forward. We're going to be behind. And every year that we're behind is another year that we don't either figure out how to get to more equality, or figure out how to extend our lives, or figure out how to eliminate suffering, or figure out how to, make the world, the environment a better place through technology. So I'm not as optimistic as I once was. We're going to have a lot to catch up to make up for what coronavirus did to the economies of the world, as well as how it's increased inequality.
All right, good points. And wishing you well in lockdown San Francisco. Hope to see you get out the other side of it ASAP. Thanks to you both. That's a wrap on the future of humanity. You guys were awesome. Love to have you on the show again sometime. And as always, thanks for tuning into Futurists World. Subscribe, share, like, share, follow, comment, and get behind Futurists World on futurist.world. See you on the next episode. Thanks, KB. Thanks, Zoltan. See you soon.
Thank
Bye.
you.